Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, a Yale graduate who knows firsthand what it takes to stand out in one of the most selective schools in the world. And we'll be talking about what drew her to Yale, why it turned out to be such a great fit for her, and how she approached key parts of her college application from her essays to her interview. So, if you're curious about what her Yale experiences was like, this is the episode for you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jillian. Thank you so much for having me.
I've been introducing some new faces on the podcast lately. So, why don't we start by having you briefly introduce yourself, your background, and what you do at InGenius Prep?
Hello, everyone. I'm Titania. I am a graduate counselor here at IGP, and I am a Yale graduate. So I really genuinely enjoyed my time at Yale, and I really do think I have a lot of insights about not only my experience at Yale, but also applying to Yale and the whole vibe.
I'm very curious about your whole experience. To start, what first drew you to Yale, and when did you realize that it was a fit for you?
So this is kind of funny. My mom, she went to Harvard. She went to Harvard grad school and then became a professor. So she really loved Harvard. I grew up in the Boston area, so Harvard was like the place to be. So when my mom was taking a look at my grades, she's, "Oh, you actually have a chance of getting into the Ivy Leagues." So we did a lot of college tours, as you do when you're a 10th, 11th grader. And we went to Yale. We drove all the way down from Boston to Connecticut and we went on a tour. And as soon as I walked into Sterling Memorial Library and I saw the big stained glass windows, they had a large checkout desk that sort of looked like the place where you go in a church because it's designed to be like a church. I thought, wow, this is a church for knowledge. I love this place. As soon as I saw that place, I was hooked. It wasn't a traditional place that felt really stuffy about trying to be smart for the sake of some kind of performative thing. It felt like a place that really cared about knowing things and knowing all sorts of different things. Honestly, that's what drew me to it, and that's what I found at Yale, which I feel very fortunate to have been able to do.
It sounds like you stepped into Yale and then you just felt connected to the place.
Yeah, I would say that's right. I think I'm very lucky to have been able to find a place where I stepped in and felt immediately comfortable. I took a tour of Brown, I took tours of Williams and Amherst, and thought, wow, these are really cool places. I could really see myself going here. But when I went to Yale, I thought, this is a place for people who are like me, who are curious and thoughtful and maybe a little bit very nerdy, but who aren't ashamed to be who they are, which is a big nerd. The kind of things I was a nerd about was I really loved my religions class. I loved my English classes, my history classes, all of these humanities things I was really interested in. I was participating in social justice summer camps at that point. So I was like, I'm very nerdy about systemic issues. And for the people who are nerds about that kind of thing, Yale felt like right at home. But it has incredible math programs as well and science programs. If I were to describe the kind of attitude of Yale, it's just people who really enjoy the things that they care about and are interested in seeing where those things intersect with other parts of the world that they don't necessarily imagine at first. I don't think I ever imagined that my love of social justice would intersect with things like music or theater, but those are all things that I did at Yale, and those kind of all culminated into my final thesis, which was actually in the form of a graphic novel, which I printed myself because I took a print class. It's just such a great place for interdisciplinary learning, and you're always talking to other students who are interested in other things than you are. I remember just having conversations with a biology major and talking about the ways that her studies of biology and my studies of international migration overlapped in really interesting ways and just in the ways that you thought about it. So that was something I really valued.
When you think back to your application, what do you think that truly sets you apart from the rest of the application pool? What do you think resonated with the admissions officers then?
It was an accident, but the social justice program I mentioned earlier was actually in the summer of my freshman year. I was looking for something to do and I ran into a counselor and she said, "Hey, here's like a job you could do. It pays $100 a week. It's like a 6-week program, $600. And I said, I am 14 years old and $600 is an infinite amount of money. And that ended up being the social justice program where I was a student and you'd be paid a stipend for attending. I thought it was so interesting going there, meeting people from literally all walks of life just around Boston. Not only did I meet kids from like wealthier suburbs, I met kids from like more underserved neighborhoods, just people across the racial economic spectrum in Boston. And I was honestly really blown away. I enjoyed it so much that I went back the next year, also because I needed a job. And then I went back the next year. And then before I knew it, I'd actually built up a record of consistency and passion. And without honestly my intention, I'd created a persona, which is something we talk about at IGP all the time. And I've always believed that the consistency that I was able to display, the kind of consistency and interest, and my ability to tie that experience and what I'd learned there into my studies, my essays, that was really what set me apart. When I was talking to other students during college admissions, I remember some people who had better grades than I did hadn't gotten into Ivy League colleges and they're pretty stressed out. And I realized then that it was really important to not only be able to show that you have good grades and to show that you're interested in the typical activities that look really good on, or that are supposed to look really good on an application, things like debate, things like Math Olympiad. Those all look really good. But it's also just as important to be able to have a consistent passion and identity that you're genuinely interested about. And I think that my genuine interest in social justice issues was able to shine through not only my activities list, but also my essays, my
Mhm.
class choices, and even my interviews.
Now I want to dive into the most exciting part of the process and everybody's always interested in, which are the essays. So I love to hear your thought process on how you approached your Yale essays and how did that shape your application persona?
For sure. I actually really loved writing my essays. I remember that the Yale essay didn't really have a prompt, and I think sometimes that can be really intimidating. But for me, I had been thinking so much about my own experience in not only the social justice programs that I had been participating in, but also just like the kinds of events that I had been like going through. I had recently visited my grandfather, who was getting pretty old, and I'm Vietnamese, and he couldn't speak English anymore, and I couldn't speak Vietnamese. I was really sad about it, just watching him and knowing that this person was really important to me. I was able to see that and connect it to the things that I had been learning at my social justice program and say, okay, not only is this personal issue something that affects me personally, like deeply and emotionally, but it's also something that kind of has manifested from a larger societal issue that I think is a very interesting thing to talk about. So connecting this part of my identity to a larger social issue and being able to bring that together in a way that I thought was very concise, very elegant, and I was really proud of it. So honestly, it was a little bit like a diary. I was diarying a little bit about how I felt, but I was also able to turn that into something that connected to the larger world. For my other essay, I talked about an issue with a student that we had at the program that I was attending. I was able to look at it through multiple lenses from like the interpersonal to the institutional to like the societal and talk about the ways in which we handled all three of those. I think this approach really did show how I was able to think about the world in a more complex and nuanced way. I do think that you have to be really careful about doing something like this. I think I always recommend it. It's really important to try to show your understanding of the world in these very multifaceted ways. I also think it's really easy to go a little bit overboard and to try to paint yourself as maybe too sympathetic or too heroic. And that's something I really had to try and pull back on. If I were to write an essay where I wanted to appear flawless, or if I wanted to appear like the hero of the story, that would maybe ring a little bit false. So I really tried to be careful not to talk myself up too much, but let my actions and let my thought process speak for itself. That really worked out for me because it shows a bit of humility and also that you understand, or that I understood, that I was not really the center of the world or the center of anyone's world, which honestly is not an easy thing to think about. As when I was that age, I was like, wait, I'm not the center of the world? The world does revolve around me? Wait a minute. but I think it's an important thing to at least consider.
I think when it comes to essays, a lot of students struggle with what to write about because they're worried about writing something that admissions officers find boring or they just don't know what to write about. So, do you have any tips on where to start or how to start the essays?
Yeah. Don't try to impress people too much with a thing that you have done, would be one of my big recommendations. A lot of people will tend towards, oh, I did this incredible thing. Let me write about how it changed my life forever. And I would tend towards something that changed me in my ordinary life and think about how that is connected to the themes of your life. When I was writing about my grandfather, the theme there that I was thinking about was I feel like a perpetual immigrant. I feel very sad because my success in one world means that I've been cut off from another one. And that felt, one, not really up to me, and two, like a survival strategy that my parents and my grandparents used in order to ensure that I was successful. I didn't learn Vietnamese so that I wouldn't have an accent, so that I would be able to speak English better. I don't think there's anything that's necessarily particularly special about sitting on a couch in my uncle's house next to my grandpa, but by being able to see that moment and connect it to the things I had learned in class and in my summer programs, and also connected to the ways that I felt at the time, I think I was able to draw out a special moment that felt very emblematic of who I was, what I was trying to express, and what I thought at that time. And I think that's very helpful. Oftentimes, if you're talking about an extraordinary event or something extraordinary that you did, it can come off as bragging a little bit. Yes, even though college applications are bragging, that is what you have to do. I think it's also important to try and remind them that you're not just a list of accomplishments. You're a person. You're a person with thoughts and feelings, and your thoughts are really interesting, and your feelings are very nuanced, and that you care a lot about the world around you, not just because you've done cool stuff.
But I think what really matters is that you showcase your personality too, right? You showcase that and you think about, like you said, think outside of just your little box and think about the larger world and how you can impact that.
Exactly. And not impact it for the sake of impacting it, but because that's something you care about. And so the advice that I've been giving to my students is find what you care about. Find the thing that you're passionate about, find what makes you interested in the world and in other people, and follow that. What is it that makes you tick? What is it that really gets you thinking or talking or caring about things? And that passion is ultimately, I think, what colleges are looking for. That's certainly what Yale was looking for. They wanted somebody who was very passionate and like really cared a lot and really thought a lot about the world. And I really do believe that.
Transitioning into your Yale interview, what was that like? What was that moment that stood out to you or that you think helped you make an impression at that point in time?
I had a great time in my Yale interview, which I cannot say about some of my other interviews. He was an older man and he was enthusiastic about Yale, and I was enthusiastic about Yale. We started talking about what are your interests? What are you thinking about that is interesting? And I brought up, actually, I studied Latin in high school. Fun fact. So not helpful in most parts of life, but surprisingly helpful in this very specific moment because he also had studied Latin. And so finding that moment of like connection and finding that moment that we had in common and being able to talk specifically about why I studied Latin and what I found interesting about it, I think was a really cool moment of connection that we were able to have because I was able to talk about this thing we had in common and then connect that back to the kind of person I was trying to portray myself as. I really was just like a big old nerd. But I talked about how I really like Latin because not only the language, but also the history of it, as you can really draw the connections between that and our modern day. And I thought that was really cool. And we were able to just talk about that because he had also read Cicero. From what I was understanding, I think he thought that the way that I was able to talk about it and connect my interest in structures and history and how the past influences the present in all of these invisible ways, I think he thought that was very interesting and compelling. And also, we just had a good time. We just had a good chat. And I think it's important to try and relax a little bit. Be yourself, because if you're yourself and the interviewer can relax around you, then they'll have a more positive impression. I can contrast that with my interview from Princeton, where I didn't love the idea of going to Princeton, just really wasn't my style. But I did a little bit of research and found, okay, I guess here's a few things I can talk about why I like Princeton. The person was saying what kind of extracurriculars I was interested in. I said, oh, I'm interested in the eating clubs or the dining clubs. I love to eat. I think food is really interesting. I was interested in food. That is not what supper clubs are. That is not what the dining whatevers at Princeton are. Those are basically secret societies or whatever. And I didn't know that. And so she looked at me saying, what are you talking about? And I said, oh no, I've done something wrong. So a few things I would definitely advise. One, make sure you do your research on the school and really thoroughly find something that you would genuinely be interested in. I had that for Yale. I could talk about the library because I really liked it. I thought it was cool. I could not talk about supper clubs because I didn't really know what those were. I saw the word food and I was like, I'm there. But make sure you have a more thorough understanding of something you're genuinely excited about. And two, come with a question. They're always going to ask at the end of the interview, do you have any questions? And I think it's very important to have a good question that shows that you've done your research, that shows that you have a question that looking things up alone couldn't necessarily answer. So something about their experience at Yale or something about something they enjoyed at Yale, maybe even more specific, like how did you find your classes? Or did you feel like the lack of ability to double major impacted your experience? It shows that you are genuinely interested in the school, and it makes them also feel that they can help you in this way that's not just judgmental. They can offer you something. And I always think that people really like helping people, especially people who are volunteering their time to interview.
Now I kind of want to dive into more of your Yale experience. I think you mentioned previously Yale has a very distinct personality and what they're looking for in applicants. But how would you describe the Yale attitude among students?
I'd say everybody's really curious. Like almost everybody is really curious. Of course, I would never want to blanket stay everybody is like this or everybody is like that. But on the whole, I thought people at Yale were very curious and very determined to follow their passions, regardless of what they were. Some people were really passionate about getting good grades, but other people were really passionate about their extracurriculars like debate or the newspaper or even things like the Yale Exploration Club, where people would just like sneak into various buildings at Yale just to explore. So you'll see astrophysics majors taking dance classes or history majors in a computer science course. I took a musical theater class. I was taking a print course. Everybody was really following whatever they thought might be interesting pretty much whenever they could. I always really appreciated that people weren't afraid to just try out new things. It also helps that you do have a common core curriculum, so you need to take a certain amount of language, you need to take a certain number of science and math classes, and sometimes people think that's really frustrating, but I really think it helps create more well-rounded individuals, which is the point of a liberal arts education. You are forced a little bit to get out of your bubble of what you think is important and experience things that other people think are important. For the most part, people at Yale really embraced that.
So, when it comes to the Yale academic environment, how did it challenge you to shape the way you think and learn? Was there something about the academic vibe there that pushed you to see things or tackle problems in a whole new way?
When I was in it, I definitely didn't think, oh, I'm challenging problems in a whole new way. But coming out of it, being a big fish in a small pond to being a small fish in a big pond is something that a lot of people often talk about when going to top universities from schools that they are already very top at. I had a little bit of that, but I also just didn't have the number one grades in my school. I was maybe just outside the top 10%. But being there, I think I learned to take much more seriously other people's points of view. I think when I was coming in, I thought I knew everything or had a very strong idea of what I cared about and what I thought was important or interesting or necessary. Going to Yale and being surrounded by all of these people who cared very deeply and for very good reasons about all sorts of things made me really reevaluate everything I thought I knew. I took a biology class my first year, and I didn't end up being a biology major. I didn't even end up majoring in science, but I made some really great friends who cared very deeply about biology and for reasons that weren't just, I want to be a doctor or I want to be a big scientist. They cared about biology in a way that was very personal to them. And I realized, oh, that is really interesting. The fact that you care about this thing so passionately for the same reasons that I care about the things that I care about very passionately. And we have a lot in common, even though our studies couldn't be more different. I've mentioned it before and I'll say it again. The intersectionality aspect of it, or the interdisciplinary aspect of it, really opened my eyes to the different ways that I could think about the issues not only in my life, but also in the world around me. Things like traffic planning and engineering actually have huge impacts on accessibility and inequity. And that's just not something I would have necessarily thought about to the degree that I was able to at Yale. So that's something I really appreciated. I think I understood it on a theoretical level. Oh, yeah, if you build the highway, like, then people can get some places and can't get other places. But talking to people who thought about engineering and structural design, I was like, oh, right. So you have to think about all of these things I had just never considered. And it's really made my worldview a lot more full. And I don't know, it makes me happy. I like being able to think about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I guess the more people you meet, the more you learn something new and you feel like, oh wow, I don't know actually much about anything at all.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's my favorite part. Going into Yale, I was a little bit like, I know a lot of stuff. So many of these people are like just ignorant. And then I got older and I met more people and I talked to people and I said, oh, wait, actually, it is I who is ignorant. And I have a lot to learn from pretty much everybody here. It did teach me some humility, which I sorely needed. But it also taught me some self-confidence and to know that actually the things that I thought were important, at the same time, the things that other people think are also important. So how do I balance these two ideas and carry that into the rest of my life? I think it's really made me a much more balanced person, a well-rounded individual, perhaps, thoughtful member of society. One thing it certainly let me do was I ended up being a scientific paper editor for a while. I worked at a UCLA lab and I would edit their papers. So, taking my really intimate knowledge of English grammar and writing and applying it to the scientific fields. So, I would be able to talk to scientists and really try to listen to what they had to say, translate it to concepts I understood, and then make their writing more accessible and straightforward for submissions to journals like Nature and the proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences. So I thought that my education in the sciences actually ended up helping me professionally too, which was neat.
What kind of things that you struggled with at Yale, and is there any advice you'd give to students who are going to be starting out their college life soon or will be entering that phase of life?
I definitely struggled when I got to Yale because before I was living at home, I went to school, I had all of my classes, like one after the another. I knew pretty much what I was going to do at all hours of the day. At Yale, I had to fend for myself, and that was tough. I was away from my family for the first time. I had so much unstructured free time after having all of my activities just scheduled. And I really struggled with that. And so, one of the things I would really recommend now as a high school student and also when you get to college is looking out for academic skills tutoring. I think it's really easy to get lost in the sauce, as the kids say, with all the things that you want to do and all the things that you have to do, managing your time and trying to plan out these big projects without structured support. It can be tough. InGenius offers academic skills tutoring, which is sincerely so helpful. It's something I wish I had in high school, something I did once I got to college because Yale has academic skills tutoring and as well as other subject tutoring. It's easy to think, oh, like studying, just do it, just study harder. But there's actually a lot of ways to do it better. And there's a lot of ways to project plan that don't necessarily come intuitively for everybody. If you need help, ask for it. Doesn't matter whether you're having a bad time in chemistry or you can't figure out how to structure out your big research paper that's due at the end of the semester. So, tutoring, you're always able to ask for help. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is something I touched on a little bit earlier, which is the idea that you're going from a place where you're a big fish in a small pond to a small fish in a big pond. It can be really scary when you're surrounded by people who seem to be just shining so brightly academically. They seem like they're able to do everything. And that's something I experienced a lot at Yale. There were just some people who were so good at doing everything. They were like on the debate team and they were getting all A's and they're like running the newspaper. But it ended up being really nice being surrounded by people who you were positive are smarter than you. And it was really nice not feeling like you had to be the biggest person in the room. Being able to understand and respect that everybody has something to say and everybody has something to learn. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be the best version of you that you can be. Once I realized that I didn't have to keep up with the debate kids if I didn't want to debate, I didn't have to get all A's in my biology class if I didn't actually want to do anything with biology, like I didn't have to keep going. This is a place where I get to really lean into what I'm interested in and lean into what makes me tick. I get to do that surrounded by people who are so smart and so curious and so interested in so many things. That was the time I realized I had the best time at Yale.
A great segue to lessons growth and also mental health, which
Mhm.
is a very important part of it. Let's talk about mental health pressures for a little bit of high school and going through all these elite college admissions process. What advice would you give to students who feel like they're struggling to keep up and having all that burden on your shoulders?
Absolutely. The first thing I would say is take a deep breath. It's tough. I get it. We all get it. All of our counselors have gone through the application process. They've seen how tough it is firsthand, and they believe in you. We all believe in you. And honestly, along the lines of taking a deep breath, make sure you're taking care of your health. I think it's easy to forget that in all of the things that you're trying to do all these activities, you're trying to write all these incredible essays. Understand that there are some things inside your control and there's some things outside of your control, and that you can do everything in your control. And then after a certain point, that's not up to you, and that's okay. No matter what you do, it's going to be your best. The amount that you're able to give at any given point is your best, because if you could have done better, you would have done better. Take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. Do some exercise if you can.
Go
Go
for
for a
it.
walk. Touch grass. Huge fan of touching grass here. I love to touch grass when I can, and it should be more often. Just as much as your professors want to help you in college, your teachers really love to help you in high school. Lots of schools have counselors that you can talk to about things that you're going through. I know I was really stressed in high school, so I was talking to a school counselor, and it really helps to be able to at least just get things out. And don't be too hard on yourself, because this is tough and you're doing great.
So now I want to talk about your growth transitioning from Yale
Mhm.
into the music world. Obviously, you've attended the Los Angeles Academy of Artists and Music Production, or
Mhm.
LAMP, and it's a stark difference going from Yale to the LAMP. How did that creative pivot come out of your Yale experience?
To be honest, I think it was inevitable because I went to Yale and I took all of these classes and I was so interested in what was happening in these classes. But then coming out, a lot of the traditional paths available to me just really didn't feel appealing. Things like working as a consultant or going to law school, all these things seemed really interesting, but not necessarily what I was very passionate about. So I struggled a little bit just being, what do I do next? But I realized during that time that I actually really loved art and I loved music. Like I said, my thesis was a comic book because I thought comics had a really interesting way of expressing time and space and ideas. I have always been very passionate about music. It wasn't an extracurricular I participated a ton in at Yale, but it was something I was always doing for myself. I realized over the pandemic, I was working for a historian and thinking, this is maybe not exactly what I want to do. What I want to do is make things. What I want to do is create things. And so I applied on a whim to this program and I got in, which was genuinely shocking. I was super surprised. The program is run by this pair of Grammy winning producers named Stargate. They made like Diamonds by Rihanna and like Fireworks by Katy Perry. And then they said, "Hey, we want you in our program." And I said, "Is this a joke? Am I being scammed?" But it turned out it was real, and it turned out that they thought that what my music had to offer was genuinely is really cool. That came out of Yale because it taught me that what I was passionate about and what I cared about mattered a lot. What I wanted to do and what I needed to follow for me was really important. And for some people, you can definitely follow that in your free time as you're doing your job. And I think had that been something I wanted to do, that would have been great. Having that Yale degree genuinely super helps. You'll always get a second look at least. But for me, I felt that following a creative path myself was something I really cared about. Going to LAMP and meeting all of these like music industry professionals was really eye-opening to see the different ways that people thought about music and seeing the different ways that people wanted to create things and what they thought was meaningful and important.
The final question before I let you go. What advice would you give to students about finding a college that fits them? Because you mentioned a lot about fit earlier. What advice would you give to these students who are finding that right fit for them for college?
And very practical advice. I think it's important to visit the college that you want to go to and see, could you see yourself in this place? Does this place feel like one that you would enjoy spending time in? Does it feel like people are interested in the same things that you are? Does it feel like people care about things in a similar way as you care about them? I visited Brown and I said, okay, this is really cool. People here are really creative. I'd be happy going here. But the kind of nerdy intensity of Yale really appealed to me. Oftentimes, it's easy to forget that you have a choice and that the things that you care about matter and the things that you believe in matter. Those things will do wonders for helping you find a place where you belong. I think many students can be successful in many places. I think I could have been successful and happy many places. I personally am glad it was Yale because I felt like I was able to understand a lot more about myself because of it.
That's a good way to end the podcast. Thank you for sharing all of your personal experiences and your wisdom. And hopefully, our listeners are inspired by your journey listening to you on this episode. So, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jillian. And thank you so much to all of the listeners of the IGP podcast. I would actually genuinely love to come back and just talk about other stuff. As you
Yeah.
can maybe tell, I really like yapping.
We'll
Thank
see
you. Take
you.
care.